Hey everyone, this is Chris with Hook, Line, and Paddle. And I'm here today with one of my kayaking friends, Michael Snyder. And what we wanted to do today is kind of talk about how we decide where we're going, when we're going kayaking. You know, talk about how to figure out where to find places to go, a little weather and tide, that type of thing. And then just a little touch base on some of the stuff that we always take with us. You know, we're a little bit different. You know, Michael does just a lot more touring kayaking, so and I paddle with him doing that, and then I do a lot more kayak fishing. So, you know, some of the stuff we take in our sit insides, I kind of omit when I take in my sit on top for fishing. But we'll kind of get to that towards the end. So, yeah, we're just going to kind of talk about how we kind of decide where we're going kayaking. You know, we're here in Wilmington, North Carolina, so we have access to the intercoastal and oceans 4 miles down the road from the store. We're very close to the Cape Fear and Northeast Cape Fear rivers and all the feeder creeks that come off of that. So kind of go through some of the places we go and why we pick them and how we pick them. And this can be applied to pretty much wherever you are in the country. You know, once you find your spot and then realizing, you know, wind, weather, tide, when to go, when not to go, and plug those into the algorithm, and you can pick a great day to go kayaking. So to start with, Michael, you have a book from Paul Ferguson. Is that Paddling Eastern North Carolina?
I do. This is, I refer to this as a paddling Bible for local paddling. This is Paddling Eastern North Carolina by Paul Ferguson. This is a really good book. It tells all about paddling, mostly your inland areas in Eastern North Carolina. It tells about your put-ins, the duration of the paddle, different sections of the different rivers, like the Northeast. It has it set out in sections, usually no more than 3 to 6 miles in length. So it's a very handy book to have, to use as a reference and a go-by.
And then with that, as they're set out in sections, if you want to do multiple sections, you just start adding up your mileage. And you know, if it's a 3 mile section, it's a 4 mile section, and a 2 mile section. If you do all 3 sections, it's a 9 mile paddle for you.
That's right. It tells the difficulty of the sections and the different water levels that it's optimal, and also gives the websites to check for the water levels on these various rivers, like the Black River in the south, in those areas.
Right, and that usually goes back to the USGS, the tide, the flow, the tide, not the tide, excuse me, the river level gauges.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, we'll have a few. We'll put in some few other resources for that kind of stuff. You know, for like Michael's talking about for inland stuff, the USGS website for the tide, for their, again, not tide, river gauges is a good access for that. And another thing, and that's a great book. I own a copy of that myself, and it really is a paddling Bible. Another great thing, if you want a little bit more of a broader shot of the state you're in and some options, is a gazetteer from DeLorme. Now we're here in North Carolina, so I obviously have the North Carolina Gazetteer, but this is chock full of information. State parks, county parks, national forests, boat ramp put-ins and all that. And the way the Gazetteer works is on the back of it is the state, and the number in that square corresponds to its page number in the book. So we're here in Wilmington, North Carolina, so we'd be page 85, but the way it's broken up, I would also consider page 87 if I want to get down on the Southport, Brunswick County beaches, or if I wanted to move up towards Jacksonville area, page 86, 78, and 79 would be an 8 for me doing that also. And you know, here in Wilmington, this is about an hour drive either direction, maybe an hour and a half if you go all up towards Hammocks Beach State Park. But again, a really great resource. Plugging this in to Paul Ferguson's book, Google Maps, Google Earth, other great ways to kind of tie everything together. And North Carolina Wildlife on their website also lists all state-run wildlife accesses and gives you an address to it. And that's what the state of North Carolina does. That's where you find theirs. You know, it may differ in the state that you're in where that information, whether it's wildlife or Marine Resources Commission, something like that. So we've kind of figured out, you know, if we decided where we want to go, you know, this time of year, we're getting close to Christmas, we're in December, you know, so we tend to do a little bit more backwater paddling, Cape Fear, Northeast Cape Fear, and the feeder creeks off of it. So other than figuring out what the river gauge is, you know, what are some of the things you kind of take into consideration before, or if we're going to pick a day to go.
Right. Well, Chris, as you mentioned, we have such a variety of paddling around here, both the coastal areas and the inland. And in the summertime, we tend to paddle the open water a little bit more.
Yeah, we do.
In the coastal areas, wider open areas. And in the wintertime, as you mentioned, when it gets a little bit cooler, you tend to go in the creeks. So that's also when you don't need to be concerned about alligators and some other reptiles that may cause some discomfort to some people. So that's when Ferguson's would really come in handy. Whether you're paddling open water or in some of these creeks, it's almost axiomatic that you would want to wear a PFD or life jacket.
Yeah,
no
absolutely.
matter what you're paddling. In the wintertime, of course, that's even more important because if you should happen to, and people think that you don't need to wear it in the creek or somewhere, but you can run up on a tree limb or something like that and end up out of your boat. And when the water's cold, 50 degrees or lower, there's a thing called a gasp reflex. And when you end up in this cold water, you involuntarily gasp. And if you're in the water and take in some water, you may not be able to recover and get back in your boat. So if you are wearing a PFD, that's a basic piece of safety gear right there.
For sure. In
an enclosed touring kayak or recreational boat, even with a larger cockpit, it's always a good idea to take a pump with you. And this is a really good pump right here. This one actually comes apart that you can dismantle it and clean it and lubricate the shaft if you want to. This has got a nice stainless steel shaft in it. But a pump is really good because if you turn over in your boat, get out of your boat, have to get back in, it's really helpful to be able to pump it out. Particularly if you're by yourself, you're not going to be able to get the water out of it just on your own.
And I mean, even not considering that you flipped over, but some of the areas we go to, we always find cool places, kind of get out, kind of scope around, check some things out, and if you do that a few times in and out of the boat, and just the water that collects in your paddling shoe just ends up running into the kayak. Just setting it up on the bank at an angle and having that water run back behind the seat, that pump's a good way just to get that little bit of water that you've getting out of the boat a couple times, kind of exploring, kind of gets out.
Right, exactly.
So it's nice to have.
Yeah. Another good thing particularly in open water, but really just about anywhere, is to carry with you, whether you utilize it in the enclosed places or not, is a paddle leash. And this one comes in a handy little pouch right here. And a paddle leash, one of it attaches to the deck lines on your boat, and the other goes around the shaft of your paddle. And it's not really obtrusive while you're paddling, but it's really handy if you get out of your boat to go ashore or something like that. It helps you to keep track of your paddle. If you should happen to inadvertently get out of your boat in the water, your paddle won't go floating off somewhere. It'll be attached to your boat all the time. So, but particularly in open water, a paddle leash is a good thing to have.
Right. And then, another thing too, a lot of people don't carry little handheld VHF radios, but we all have our cell phone, but it only works if it's dry. So a Pelican case is a great option for that, not only phone, but keys, your wallet, stuff like that. They come in various sizes. This is a 1050. They come, for today's size cell phones, and maybe your key fob to get back in your car and your wallet, or at least just your ID, 1050 or the 1060, which is a little shorter and a little longer, would be the appropriate case. They make a 1040 and a 1030. I just think smartphones have gotten a little bit too big. Way back in the day when I had a Nokia flip phone, it would fit in a 1030 case. But something like this is great to have. It's crush proof. It's going to keep your phone dry. It's the blue inside's foam, so your phone's not going to rattle around the plastic and get dinged up. So something like this is good, for protecting your phone while you're out there. And for safety wise, you brought life jacket. I always, you should have a whistle with you. You have to have a noise-making device while you're on the water, and for a kayak, a whistle counts. But these are really designed, it's hard to see in the packaging, a little key ring on here. You can put it to your zipper or off to the side. I've zip tied them a few places on different life jackets, depending on if it's my touring life jacket, a rec jacket, or my fishing jacket, they just have different connection points. So on my fishing jacket, I have it zip tied a little bit away from me, so I have room to get into a pocket, but it's still right there if I need to blow it, to either let a boat know I'm there, or if I'm in trouble, I need someone to come help me.
Right. This is something that I've been using for years. I started out using them when I was surf kayaking, but it's simply gloves. And these are not to keep your hands warm. This is to help you grip the paddle shaft when the shaft is wet and your hands are wet. It really helps in that way a lot. But it also helps keep the sun off the back of your hands. You can put sunscreen on all you want, but your hands are invariably going to stay wet.
Right.
And when you have these on, it keeps the sun off the back of your hands and keeps your hands from getting all torn up and everything from the sunlight. So I've gotten where I always wear gloves these days.
Yep. And there's also the skeleton glove from NRS. Again, same deal like Michael has said, great sun protection for the top of your hand, sunscreen gets washed off. And what they did with the skeleton was they made some of the fingers a little bit longer, and I like wearing these fishing because I get a little bit more sun protection on my hand than the boater, but I have just enough finger exposed so it's easy to retie rigs or knots while we're fishing. So again, gloves are a great thing to have, and again, hands are wet, paddle's wet, you still get the grip and a little bit of comfort. Your hands don't get all torn up. So both gloves work just fine. I like the skeleton a little bit better because when I'm fishing, I like to have a little bit more coverage, but I still have some dexterity to retie a knot.
Another optional piece of equipment is a dry bag. And they come in different sizes and different materials, but to carry some spare clothing in.
Especially with colder weather, spare clothing.
Things that you don't want to get wet. And believe me, folks, a garbage bag, even tied off, is not going to cut it. But we're talking about seasonal paddling here, so a good sized dry sack with a full change of clothes in it and maybe a polyester towel or something like that so you can dry off. It's always good to carry a spare change of clothing with you when you paddle in colder weather.
Yeah, and another thing, when customers ask in the shop, like, well, how big of a dry bag do I need? If you think you need like a 15 liter, get a 25, or get a 20 or a 25, because you can always make a bigger dry bag smaller by rolling it down. You can't unroll a smaller dry bag and make it bigger. So sometimes it's better to err on maybe one or two size bigger bag you think you actually need. So in the summertime, when your clothing's smaller, another pair of shorts, another t-shirt or something like that, you don't need that much room. In wintertime, when you got pants and another fleece or something like that with you and a towel, you need a little bit of a bigger dry bag. So my recommendation is err on the side of going maybe one size bigger, because you can always roll it a little bit further down to make it smaller, more compact. You can't make a small one bigger by stretching it out. Another thing too, I like to carry with me, if I plan on going out early morning in the dark, or I know I'm going to be kind of in the summertime night fishing, I do have a flag on the back of my kayak with a light on top of it, but I do like to carry this little eco flare with me, just in case. Wind comes up, tide comes up. This time of year we're getting darker earlier. If I don't get back to the ramp as early as I think I was going to get back to the ramp, this is just nice to turn on, have dangling off my jacket just for a little extra visibility. Or even when you get back later in the afternoon, it is getting dark. It's enough light to get everything secured back on the car. But just fairly inexpensive piece of gear to carry with you. It doesn't take up a lot of room. It's super light. It's a couple batteries. You don't even know you have it in your pocket, but it's kind of nice to have when you need it.
And it's also a requirement to carry a white light that is visible to other vessels. You don't have to keep it on all the time, but you have to be able to show a white light if you're out after sundown. Yeah,
and that's why from Yak Attack, I use their VisiCarbon Pro, because it has that white 360 2-mile visibility on it. Nice thing is during the day though, that flag's up kind of 48 inches over my head, so I'm boaters from a distance a little bit more aware that I'm there. So this is kind of like, and this gear, for me fishing, I do like having the paddle leash. I'm always putting my paddle on a paddle clip, but if a wave comes by and knocks it off, it's nice to know it's tethered. Whistle's a necessity, gloves are a necessity for me. I like carrying the light. We all need to keep our electronics that we carry with us waterproof. If I'm fishing, either my propel kayaks or my paddling fishing kayaks are self-bailing, sit on top. So for me, the pump doesn't matter for fishing, but like when we go together, I carry my pump or in our touring kayak. So, you know, it depends on what style of paddling you're doing. Some of these items may be too much that you don't need. All these items could be something you do need when you're on the water. So
yeah, we're just talking about some very basic safety gear here, but there are two items that we haven't mentioned, and one of them is if you're paddling a enclosed boat, to carry a paddle float with you to help with your self-rescue. And the purpose of this discussion is not to get involved in talking about self-rescues and whatnot, but that's another, if you paddle very much, paddle float is something to ask about and learn about. But another thing that we have not mentioned is I would always carry a small first aid kit.
yes,
You don't have to have one specific to kayaking at all. You can buy one at Walmart or just anywhere else and keep it in your dry bag. But anything can happen, from blisters on people's hands from paddling to oyster cuts or that type of thing. So I would always carry at least a small basic first aid kit with me.
I normally carry the one, you know, they usually break them down for hiking.
Right.
But I carry the 4-person 2-day kit, which is only about that big. It's pretty small, but it's chock full of equipment. Like you said, blisters, band-aids for blisters, stuff like that, or cutting your foot on an oyster rock. So, and another thing we didn't talk about, which is really important, and I think a lot of people gloss over it, is because it's not a tangible item, you can't hold it or purchase it, is a float plan. And all a float plan is me saying, Michael, I'm going to Masonboro Island today, and I should be back around 3 o'clock. And around 3 o'clock, when I'm back at the ramp, I'm going to text Michael, hey, I'm back, loading the boat. It was a great trip. Wish you could have came. 4 o'clock, he hasn't heard from me. He's calling me. I'm not answering the phone. He knows something probably isn't right. And he knows where I am. He knows where I was going. And if something really did happen to me and I needed aid, he can get them in a more general pinpointed direction to help me, because he knew I was leaving boat ramp X and I was going over to Masonboro, and if I leave that boat ramp, this is pretty much the only way I'm going over to this island. And can really, if something ever did happen, it can really narrow down, you know, if you needed medical attention, they can get it there to you faster. And I think, you know, you can't buy a float plan. You can't order one off of Amazon. You just got to remember to tell someone you trust where you're going and when you're going to be back.
Good idea. Very good.
Yeah. So we've kind of gone over, like, well, one, some safety stuff and kind of how we figure out where we're going to go part. But the other thing we wanted to talk about is the when we're going to go. Again, we're here in Wilmington. We're on the ocean. We have tide cycles, high tide, low tide. That's a consideration. Wind's a consideration. So, I mean, if we're getting ready to go paddle tomorrow on the intercoastal, I mean, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Well, I'm going to check the tides. There are a number of different ways you can do that. Actually, you can look in the back page of the sports section of the newspaper, but there are various tidal apps. So if you were going to be paddling around Masonboro Inlet, you could put in your phone tides for Masonboro Inlet and the date, and you would have several different websites come up that you could figure the tides. Now, ideally, that you would like the time the tide, if you can, to go with you on the way out and with you on the way back. That's not always possible, but actually a lot of times it is, if you're pretty flexible on when you go paddling. So in other words, if I were leaving from an area called Trails End on Intercoastal Waterway up near Monkey Junction, and I wanted to go south, I would catch the incoming tide and go up there and spend some time and hopefully catch the outgoing on the way back. On the other hand, if I were going east or north toward Masonboro Inlet, I would want to go on a falling tide and catch that tide as it went out and time it so that when I came back, I would have the incoming tide with me. So the tides are very important, not just when you're actually that close to the ocean. All our creeks, Northeast Cape Fear, they are all tidal for, probably close to 20 miles inland. And it's not as strong as it would be close to the ocean, but you still have tide to contend with. And it can make your paddle a lot easier or a lot more difficult. Also, particularly in the summertime, we have what's called a sea breeze. And invariably, on a summer day, around 11 o'clock, you'll start getting wind from the southwest, the way our coast trends around here. And so you want to figure that, because that wind can come up, and you know the forecast for that day might be southwest 4 to 8, but that wind in the afternoon like that can be 10 to 15, and that can make a big difference in your paddling in terms of, if you have the tide in opposition to that wind, the water's going to be quite choppy. Or if you're paddling against that wind, that can be much more tiring. So your wind is always something to consider.
Yeah, so like summertime around here, we really shoot for more of an early morning or an earlier in the morning paddle, because, you know, and that wind comes up from the convection current created from the ocean and the beach, and the heat difference between them is why it really picks up in the afternoon. And another thing, you know, a lot of people, you know, like if you're new to kayaking and kind of new to having to figure out the tide cycle, when you go to where you want to launch from, know what it's doing. Know if it's a rising tide or a falling tide, and just take a second and observe what's going on. All right, well, I know the tide's falling and the water's going this direction, so I know when the tide rises, the water's going in this direction. And the more places you go and the more time you just take a second and know what's going on and then observe what's going on, you kind of get this mental Rolodex going of southeast wind, southwest wind, falling tide. The intercoastal's not, I'm going to work harder in the intercoastal, so I'm just going to go to the Cape Fear River and paddle, or I'm going to go this side of the inlet because I'll have the tide and the wind in my favor instead of putting it at this ramp. And it's just taking a second to know what's going on, check the tide ahead of time, 2 seconds on your phone, Google will tell you what it's doing, know what the wind's doing, and when you get there, you know, it helps you learn areas, and eventually you'll get to the point where you can never not go paddling on a day you want to go. You just might not go to the place you wanted to paddle at. You can just amend your plan. And like you said too, in the intercoastal, when the tide opposes the wind, that can also happen where we are, you know, on the Cape Fear River. We tend to have, on a falling tide and a southwest wind, the Cape Fear River gets pretty choppy, and on a rising tide and this time of year, a northeast wind, it gets rather choppy. And it's just the way the river's oriented and the way the wind blows. Those are those 2 times that you'll get some pretty good swells. Yeah, and not to scare you from coastal paddling, it's just taking a second to realizing, you know, and you may get to a spot and be like, "Ooh, wow, I didn't think it'd be this choppy." So I guess when it's a falling tide and a northeast wind, this isn't a good spot. Where else could we go? And go check it out. And a little bit of, and that's the fun part too for me, is kind of figuring things out and doing a little exploration. Yeah. But again, if you stick with it long enough, and again, just pay a little attention, you'll know where you can look at the tide and you can look at the wind, and within 5 seconds you'll know where you're going paddling that day. It may not be the place you want to go, but if you want to get on the water bad enough, you'll find a spot to go. That's
right. There's no real set formula for this. So a lot of it, there are places you prefer to paddle there in different conditions. So you'll learn these places and learn what the tide and wind does. You're probably going to end up with some favorite places to paddle, and you get used to them after a while as you learn that.
Yeah, I know. You know, my daughter really enjoys going over to Masonboro and just hanging out on the beach, playing and swimming. And I know that where we put in to go to Masonboro, at low tide, you know, it's a pretty long trudge up to the island. So we try to time, and I try to leave at least 2 hours into the rising tide. So I know by the time I get to where it's going to be shallow with the rise, I got just enough water to get on the beach, and we can hang out for 4 or 5 hours and know that I got plenty of water to get back. We've camped over there before and have done the same thing where we look at, you know, it's the afternoon, I got enough water, and then we can leave around 9 or 10 in the morning, there's still enough water, and that'll be like the weekend night we pick to go camp over there. Where if we want to camp on one of the islands in the Cape Fear River, it's really just like, well, we're going to be going up current, so let's go on a rising tide, so we got a falling tide in the morning to bring us back. So, you know, instead of trying to fight it, it's, you know, little things that you can kind of figure out. And, you know, like Michael said, if you just get out there and learn your area, you'll know when and when not to go, without really putting yourself in any kind of danger.
Right, and also not to be intimidated. by these things, as Chris mentioned, that I'm at an advanced age for a paddler, but when you kind of don't overdo it for yourself, it'll work right in well into your 70s, I assure you.
Yeah. Even the new puppy likes to paddle. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this one. We just kind of wanted to, these are the kind of videos I want to make that they're more customer driven. It's our newer paddlers that are coming in the shop and asking us questions. These are like a lot of the questions that we're getting. So I thought, sitting down with someone I've paddled with for almost 20 years now. We've been in some really cool places. We've turned each other on to some really different places. I really love, when I first got down here, I was just in love with the intercoastal, getting back in the marshes, and I just had tunnel vision. And then I started paddling with Mike, and we started going back in the Cape Fear, the Northeast Cape Fear, and a bunch of different feeder creeks. And I didn't realize within a 15-20 mile drive of Wilmington, just the extreme biodiversity of the area and just the cool things that you can see. So I hope this kind of helped, one, think about where you want to go, how you want to paddle, and plan some fun trips for either just yourself and a friend, or if you want to bring the family along, just know that you guys are going to go out and have a great day. So again, this is Chris with Hook, Line, and Paddle. I was joined by my friend Michael. We're located here in Wilmington. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. It helps us. We got more educational videos coming out on some different stuff. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video.